If we haven't met yet, my name is Annalise Gamble. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm the statewide engagement officer here at Serve Virginia. So Serve Virginia is the state service commission for the Commonwealth. We really believe in the power of volunteerism and service to help meet critical community needs, many ranging from environmental stewardship to education, economic opportunity, serving veterans and military families, and thinking about how our communities can develop resilience. And so that's really where we come to this conversation from. And I'll talk a little bit more about the work that we do. I also wanted to welcome Nancy Deutsch and Stephanie Krause to share the virtual stage with, and they're going to share a little bit more about the portrait of a thriving youth and the Commonwealth portrait of a thriving youth and how we can use that in our work. So we'll go ahead and get started. Feel free to throw, comments, introductions, and all that kind of thing in the chat, and we can kind of make this, since we're a smaller group, a little bit more of a community feel as we go through. So I wanted to kind of back up. I assume that I'm probably preaching to the choir here with a lot of folks that we're here today to talk about youth mental health because we recognize that it is a growing issue. Here at Serve Virginia, we really, believe that we are kind of, embracing a lot of causes. We know that there's a lot of really critical issues that are facing communities, but youth mental health really sticks out to us as one that there's a lot of opportunity to kind of make a difference, right? And so when we look at sort of what the need is across Virginia communities, we find that more and more middle school and high school students are feeling sad or hopeless, for longer periods of time. We find that those experiences are also getting more severe. So more students than before are experiencing major depressive episodes and not always receiving the treatment that they need to kind of successfully manage that experience. And then we also kind of just generally find for students on average that they're not always getting the training and support that they need to work, to be a person alongside their peers, right? And there's a lot of factors there that have contributed to that. And so this whole, all of these kind of statistics come together for us to really paint this picture of youth in Virginia need more support, right? They need more trusting adults in their lives, really pouring into them. They need more near-peer models that are engaging them as change makers and advocates in their space, and really seeing how do we start pulling levers, especially using service and volunteerism to start to make a difference in the lives of youth, both for their own mental health and the mental health of their peers. I also wanted to call that a big piece of this is connected to the workforce kind of youth mental health practitioners. So as a social worker myself, I went through lots of education thinking about, the mental health conditions of a community, but I also recognize that there's a lot of communities that don't have enough social workers, right? Don't have enough counselors, especially those that are focused on serving youth. And so as we think about those growing needs that we were just talking about, right, in the youth mental health space, we're also thinking about the fact that there's not enough people that are kind of professionally addressing that need, and that of the people that are kind of in the profession, that a lot of those folks are nearing retirement, so they're not those near peer advocates, and also they're looking at exiting the workforce, and do we have enough folks that are entering the workforce at the same rate to be able to help kind of grow and meet the need of youth today. I just wanted to kind of highlight these statistics, really seeing how there are opportunities, we think, to really help call up more young people into these career fields, to get the training and skills and experience they need to really be impactful in this space. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight that youth are passionate about this issue, right? And so this isn't so much of having to tell youth that this is something that's a problem or that this is occurring. This is something that oftentimes youth are highlighting for, their communities. They're saying, me and my friends are concerned about this. This is something that's impacting us. It's impacting our peers. And a lot of them are already engaging in the issue in some way, whether that's advocating for change at the school level or, participating in programs and trainings to help be more prepared or more knowledgeable on the subject. We know that this is something that's near and dear to their hearts. I also wanted to highlight that lots of youth already engage in service and volunteerism as well. So as we think about kind of how do we start to make change, how do we engage people in kind of different avenues, programs, opportunities to make a difference, a lot of youth are already there, right? Whether it started as volunteering through school or, going along with a parent to, volunteer opportunity, a lot of kids already see, I'll say kids, a lot of young adults already see service and volunteerism as a strategy for them to get involved, learn things, kind of be a part of a solution. And so kind of thinking about these factors, you start to get a picture, right, of like, this isn't quite as, discouraging, I think, as sometimes the news may paint it to be. So we see that there is a great need. We see that the need is likely to grow, right, because of the conditions of the workforce. But we also see that there is that there's a mounting movement that is ready to meet the need. And so it's really just about figuring out how do we bring all of those together and equip and support that movement so that it can really kind of fully address the need that we see kind of growing in the space. I'll talk a little bit more about the Virginia Community Engagement Index and how we know these things, but just for right now, I wanted to sort of paint that picture. I also wanted to talk really specifically to the folks in this room. So I assume that a lot of us are here because we work with volunteer programs. So we may work with youth as volunteers, or we serve youth in our work. And so whether or not we're specifically thinking about young adults, we're thinking about, the youth that are demonstrating this need and really kind of trying to picture a better future, right? And how do we use our limited resources to really help kind of meet these growing demands on kind of the programs and services that we offer. So Serve Virginia, with a variety of different partners from across the state, many that are on this call and many that aren't, but we are designing a Virginia Youth Mental Health Corps that will launch in September of 2025. The Youth Mental Health Corps is going to do a couple of key things. It's going to engage young Virginians, so Virginians between the ages of 18 to 24, in AmeriCorps or national service opportunities. I'll talk more about what that is, but these are kind of more highly committed service opportunities where folks are stepping in and agreeing to a term of service that can be 6 months or a year, and directly serving youth and leveraging existing resources to help meet critical community needs. So we're really excited about this opportunity to directly meet youth where they are and provide service and support to those folks kind of in this near peer model. We also hope to maximize this experience for young adults and make sure that they're getting the service to career or service to credit opportunities that are really going to help them enter the workforce. So this is about today, right? This is about serving youth and kind of meeting that youth mental health need that we see in communities. But this is also about taking a step back and saying, how can we prepare and equip these volunteers to really make the biggest difference? How can we prepare them to be, advocates, practitioners, clinicians in the future so that we can kind of continue addressing that larger workforce problem, in addition to that immediate youth mental health need. And then that's really where this service to career pathway piece comes in. We're thinking about how can we train and equip these folks that are serving as AmeriCorps members to be the professionals and practitioners of tomorrow. In the short term, that means some of these credentialing and certification opportunities, like becoming a behavioral health technician or a peer support partner. But then further down the road, these folks would have the training and support to become things like social workers, counselors, some of those other workforce opportunities that we saw on the previous slide. So we're really excited about how this kind of turns into a pipeline, right? This brings people to opportunities, equips them with the skills and tools that they need to then get on the right track moving forward to be a part of the solution more long-term. And then just kind of generally about AmeriCorps. So if you're not familiar, AmeriCorps is a national service program. Serve Virginia is the state kind of facilitator of AmeriCorps, or the state liaison, helping communities across the Commonwealth access AmeriCorps resources to meet critical community needs. Over the last year, we had members that served over 338 service sites, engaging thousands of Virginians through education opportunities, counseling high school students about post-secondary success, tutoring kids and literacy interventions, protecting the environment through at-risk ecosystem work, different things like that. And so there's really a wide range or array of how AmeriCorps members show up in communities, but we see them providing the direct service that connects Virginians with the help and services that they need. And so having this experience, right, it's been over 30 years where we've seen AmeriCorps really make a tangible impact across the Commonwealth. We knew that there was an opportunity to leverage this specifically towards youth mental health. So AmeriCorps members for a long time have been in the youth space. They've served at after-school programs, they've served in schools, they serve at organizations that serve youth in a variety of different ways. And so our kind of question here as we started to build out this Youth Mental Health Corps was really, how do we leverage and how do we better understand how AmeriCorps members are already impacting youth mental health and what opportunities there are to really help bridge kind of spaces where AmeriCorps members may not already be, to help provide and support organizations and services that are impacting youth. And so as we were sort of trying to answer that question of what is youth mental health, that's where we turned to our friends at Youth-Nex and UVA to really start kind of unpacking what this can look like and how we can really have a better understanding and picture of what youth mental health is and where we can start seeing opportunities for caring adults, whether that's AmeriCorps members, non-AmeriCorps members, volunteers, to come in and kind of help strengthen that network or that system that's supporting youth. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nancy Deutsch to talk a little bit about the portrait of a thriving youth.
Great. Thank you so much, Annalise. So thanks for having me. Great to see everyone and talk to some fellow Virginians today. So we're going to introduce to you this idea of this portrait of a thriving youth that Annalise talked about. And we have both sort of this, I'll talk you through sort of why we developed this and what it encompasses, sort of a holistic view of health and well-being for young people. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the Virginia-specific version that we've developed through the Commonwealth Alliance for Thriving Youth. So Annalise, if you want to move on to the next slide. So when we talk with this portrait work, when we talk about a thriving youth, we really mean a young person who's not only doing well across the various dimensions of development, but who also has the internal capacity and external resources that they need to continue to do well. So thriving is really holistic and dynamic. We also know that settings matter and systems matter. So thriving is not the sole responsibility of each individual adolescent. Even though we are focused on the adolescent as an individual, we view them as part of these systems and structures. And we see it as the responsibility of the people and systems and structures around youth to ensure that they have the resources they need to thrive. Thriving is also not a marker not only of one's present skills, but also the trajectory that one is on. So it's really both present and future looking. So we can go to the next slide. So the portrait really depicts the full period of adolescence. So we really think of this as starting from early to middle, starting in early adolescence, moving up to middle adolescence and into late adolescence and young adulthood. So this wide range of approximately ages like 10 to 25, sort of from the onset of puberty up until emerging adulthood. We see this as really surfacing the developmental needs, the assets, and the milestones that a young person might experience over this course of time in their life. We also know that this is a developmental period that is rich with opportunity to learn and grow, both by way of brain development and physical development. So we know that the brain is changing at a rate greater than any time period other than that 0 to 3 time period. And there's also rapid physical and social development. So all of those things make adolescence this opportune time for intervention and support, both. So we can go to the next. We also want to place the portrait of a thriving youth into the ecosystem in which a young person lives. So the trajectory of adolescent development is really as unique as each of us, as each individual person. It's highly impacted by the systems and settings in which we learn and grow. So the portrait isn't a how-to guide for how to create sort of systems and settings. We know that many sectors, both youth development sector, the education sector, have their own frameworks and toolkits, and it's not our intent to replace those or compete with those, or to complement the great work that's already happening in communities across the country to promote healthy adolescent learning and development. So in fact, the idea for the portrait of a thriving youth was sparked by the portrait of a graduate that educators, leaders, and policymakers in Virginia and across the country have designed to illustrate the characteristics that high school graduates should have upon completion of the 12th grade. So the aim of the portrait of a thriving youth was really to expand that illustration to depict the full range of skills and competencies that contribute to a thriving adolescent over the course of their development from early adolescence to young adulthood. So rather than focusing on just the student, right, as a sort of high school graduate, it's really the young person as a holistic person and their health and well-being broadly. So we can move to the next slide. So our intent is really that the portrait could serve as a comprehensive North Star for those supporting the development of young people. So our aim is really that the portrait builds a collective and broadly understood vision of what a thriving youth might be and do as individuals and as part of communities. Forward again, depicts what optimal youth development looks like during the period of adolescence when the support structures and systems are in place to promote thriving. And last time, provides practitioners, policymakers, and researchers with an anchor point to ground their work and to make decisions. So it really provides also young people and their caregivers a common language to advocate for the systems and settings that support thriving. So we really see this as both a tool for those who work with youth and also a tool to empower young people themselves. So we can go on. So while the portrait focuses on the domains of thriving that are important for adolescents and considers how they appear within individual youth, as I noted earlier, we acknowledge that it is not the responsibility of the young person alone, but is rather the responsibility of all adults across all settings to ensure optimal thriving of all youth. So we really see this as a tool that can help folks engaged in the youth mental health core, because it really is about empowering the adults that support young people to support their health and well-being. So I'm going to walk you through a brief introduction to the domains of adolescent learning and development that we think about in relation to the portrait. So the portrait is designed around 6 areas that, when combined, really encompass the breadth of adolescent learning and development and highlight the key tasks of this developmental period. So the tool also includes examples of milestone skills and competencies for each of these 6 areas. While we present these areas separately in order to draw attention to the specific needs and tremendous change that's taking place in each of these areas during these years, the domains often overlap and ultimately combine to illustrate the fullness of a thriving adolescent. So let's take a look at each domain. So the first domain has 2 pieces, so adolescent health, and it includes both physical health and mental health. These two are inextricably linked throughout our lives, and especially during adolescence. Because of the unique but intertwined natures of physical and mental health and the need for mental health to be prioritized alongside physical health, we've bundled them within a single domain and emphasize the holistic nature of physical and mental health together. So you'll also note that for each domain, we begin with a statement of what a young person might say about their experiences during adolescence as they work through the developmental tasks associated with that key area. So you can see this in the colored block up at the top. So for physical health, the statement is, I am experiencing physical changes and I am learning what it takes to care for myself. So I'll note that these I statements, as we call them, were developed by the group that put the portrait together, which was a combination of researchers and practitioners, but also reviewed and given feedback and edited by young people themselves in terms of these I statements. So starting with physical health, we know that adolescence is a period of development where we can establish healthy behaviors that will carry us into adulthood. During adolescence, there are hormonal changes that lead to sometimes rapid growth and development in our bodies. This includes increasing height, the development of secondary sex characteristics, and these changes can occur at different times for each of us. So this can particularly be confusing for young people who are developing physically earlier or later than their peers. Guess I included myself in that. I'm no longer in that stage, but I do have a kid who is. So if you think about, for example, especially in that early to mid-adolescent period, you can go into a classroom and kids look completely differently. It's like the joke about middle school dances, where particularly you might say the boys look like they're 8 and the girls look like they're 20, right? But then there's also a lot of variety within each group also, and everyone in between. So during adolescence, as young people are more attuned to belonging, to social rewards, and to societal norms, to what constitutes an acceptable appearance, youth may become more focused on their physical appearance. And it's really an opportunity to help adolescents learn and experience healthy eating habits and physical exercise with family and peers. Another aspect of physical well-being is getting adequate sleep, which is really critical during adolescence. Young people need more sleep and often have different circadian rhythms than at other points during development that lead them to actually want to stay up later and have more difficulty getting started in the morning. So this is why there have been movements in many communities to start school, particularly high school and middle school, later in the morning. A conscious effort to create an atmosphere that demonstrates the benefits of healthy eating and exercise, along with practices of positive self-image and positive sleep habits, is really necessary to support the physical health of adolescents. So moving on to mental health, a key focus of this call. Mental health includes emotional, psychological, and social well-being. Mental health affects how we think, feel, act, make choices, and relate to others. And I know I don't have to convince anyone on this call of the importance of youth mental health. But we really think about mental health as being more than the absence of a mental illness. It really involves having high ideals for one's identity and cognition and resiliency. It also includes self-care, coping strategies, and understanding one's triggers of stress and anxiety. And adolescents need to develop those skills to support their overall health and quality of life. Adolescent mental health also includes taking time to reflect on and process feelings and seeking to understand what we need to feel mentally healthy. So the I statement there, I'm learning that a healthy mental state is important and that it helps me to meet challenges, process feelings, seek out ways to overcome obstacles, and succeed at tasks. So the next stage or the next domain of development is cognition. And adolescence is really when we shift from concrete thinking that we have during childhood to the more abstract thinking of adulthood. At puberty, changes in cognition build on earlier development to produce more sophisticated executive functions. This includes mental processes like focusing, self-monitoring, and planning, as well as advanced cognitive skills like higher order reasoning and critical thinking. And those all enable the control and coordination of our thoughts and behavior. During adolescence, we really acquire the skills, knowledge, and abilities to achieve our goals and objectives. So while the tasks associated with cognitive development, like setting goals, critical thinking, self-reflection, and abstract reasoning, to name a few, are essential for academic development, advanced cognition also contributes to our overall health and well-being. The ability to develop these skills is really dependent on the ability to independently manage stress, adapt in the presence of challenge and adversity, and have the self-understanding and regulation to make healthy choices. So again, this overlap between health, physical health, and mental health and cognition is important. So I'm learning to think, reason, and consider various sources of knowledge to plan and make good decisions to identify and achieve my goals. The third area is identity, and this is one that I think we often associate with adolescence, right? Adolescents are really thinking about who they are in the world and who they are to themselves and others. And during adolescence, the development of identity really encompasses both who they are now, as well as who they may be in the future. So adolescents are really asking themselves and other people, who am I? How do I see myself? How do others see me? What makes me unique? Where do I fit in? And young people are really exploring possible identities. So this may be gender identities, sexual identities, cultural identities, spiritual identities, racial, ethnic, sociopolitical identities. And they're doing this through social activities, through dress and physical appearance, through their peer group status, through cultural trends, as well as other means. Their emerging reflection of values, beliefs, and aspirations are shaped and reshaped over time by multiple factors, including their family, their peers, the culture around them, and media. And the young person is really an active agent in developing their own identity. So the development of an integrated identity or a sense of internal consistency about who one is across time and across multiple social contexts is important and serves as an internal framework for making choices. And it really provides a stable base from which we act in the world and is a foundation for our mental health and well-being. Lastly, we want to note that also changes in the limbic system really increase adolescent sensitivity to peers, and they become more concerned with the evaluation of others. So adolescents might feel stress over conflicting real and ideal selves, but become better able to manage those feelings as their cognitive and self-reflection skills develop. So moving on to the next area, meaning and purpose. So we really wanted to highlight this as its own domain because of the critical role in setting a foundation for our lifelong sense of purpose during adolescence. So as we're exploring our identities in adolescence, we're seeking a sense of meaning and purpose to our lives. So this is how we start thinking about these really big questions, like why are we here? Purpose and meaning can include key aspects of one's individual identity, as well as goals that are beyond the self. So meaning and purpose are closely related, but they're also distinct constructs. So meaning really refers to more internally focused goals, aims, and commitments that are constructed by knowledge, understanding, and experiences. Purpose, on the other hand, involves asking questions like, what does it mean to do the right thing? Or what can I do to change this unjust situation? So developing a sense of meaning and purpose can be a key driver for maintaining a sense of forward movement in one's life and a reason for positive actions and worth of existence. So adolescents have been referred to as what's called motivated agents, so meaning that they're guided by their values and hopes. And during adolescence, youth typically become more invested in philosophy, politics, and social issues. It's not a coincidence that young people are often at the forefront of social movements. So they may also begin to think long-term, to set goals, and have more defined work habits and become more concerned about their future plans. So you can see this I statement as meaning and purpose that is part of also their identity, as we talked about in the previous domain. I'm exploring who I am, why I'm here, what's important to me, and how I can connect and contribute to the world around me. So the next domain is emotion. And in adolescence, we experience more extremes, highs and lows, as anyone who regularly interacts with adolescents, as I can tell by the chat, many of you do. We are very familiar with those extremes, highs and lows, and sometimes they feel confounding to us. But this is really because the part of the brain that initiates and processes emotions develops very rapidly during adolescence, and it results in a heightened sensitivity to emotional content and subtle interpersonal cues. There was a great scene in the movie. I cannot believe I just forgot the name of the movie. It was version 2, the one with the mind, the internal. Someone give it to me. Inside Out. Thank you, Stephanie. Inside Out 2. There's a great scene where the two girls are reading each other's, it's their internal thoughts as they read each other's facial cues, right? And there's this, oh my God, is she mad at me? What's this? What that, right? These subtle interpersonal cues that adolescents are extremely attuned to and have heightened sensitivity to. We will talk about the social domain next, but it links into the emotional domain, right? Because it's that heightened sense of emotionality. So it's critical that young people develop the skills to both experience their emotions safely, as well as to regulate their emotions in ways that allow for healthy engagement in social settings and in relationships. So key tasks of emotional regulation include persistence, adaptability, compassion, courage, optimism, empathy, and resilience. Adolescence is really a time when young people develop their beliefs and attitudes about themselves, the external world, and the interaction between the two. And those beliefs and attitudes are the lenses through which adolescents process their experience and demonstrate their emotional responses. So adolescents are working on the I statement here. I'm working on identifying my emotions, how to manage them in order to have the strategies to handle them in positive and meaningful ways. And finally, the social domain. It might be the final domain we discuss, but it is by no means the least important domain. All of these domains are important. And in fact, the social domain is often one that we think about a lot with adolescents, right? The expanding scope of relationships is really a hallmark of this season of life, right? The result of rapid brain development, adolescents are expanding their interpersonal skills, including recognizing others' feelings and building trusting relationships, which can provide positive supports for youth during this critical time of their lives. Relationships with peers are also becoming increasingly important as adolescents balance their need for autonomy from their parents, some separation from parents and adults, while still needing support in relationships with parents and adults, but focusing a lot more on their peers and on social relationships with their peers. So this is really this social domain, developing trusting and reliable relationships with others and learning to navigate varied and diverse social contexts. And social contexts during adolescence themselves are changing as adolescents change schools and expand their peer groups. So that is an overview of the larger portrait. We had a wonderful group of design team members and supporting staff. If you can move to the next slide. And these are all the folks who helped put together the portrait of a thriving youth. I also want to acknowledge the artist who created the visual that you see, which was created by a young artist who we hired as a graphic designer to put together those visuals for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, who's going to talk about how we took this with the Commonwealth Portrait, or with the Commonwealth Alliance for Thriving Youth, and turned it into the Commonwealth Portrait.
Thanks, Nancy. And it's so good to be here, Annalise. Thanks for the invitation. I would invite, if there is anybody who is able to come into the chat on your digital device or computer, and you haven't already, to just let Nancy and I know what community you're from and what organization you're representing, or effort or initiative. You know, there's so much here, as you heard from the incredible wisdom and download from Nancy. And we want to make sure that we're offering you information that's really deeply relevant. I also want to flag for you that I have a puppy who's barking in the background because it's almost lunchtime, Mom, and my God, why won't you feed me? And so, you know, dogs also have a way of living into their little adolescent lives and the social emotional qualities of that. So Nancy, gosh, what a master class in just the science of youth development. And it reminds me actually of a part of the origin story here for you all to know about this development of a Virginia portrait. So as some of you may, can you see the puppy? Let's see, hold on, Amy. Can you see the puppy? He's down there. You can see his little head. There he is. That's Leo. He's a little pit bull lab, oopsie puppy. We have 2 older dogs and 2 middle schoolers, so we're in the midst of this. Okay, I love that Leo was able to animate the chat. This is perfect. So if you don't already know this, I think it's important to understand that there are scholars like Nancy who have been studying the science of youth development for years. And we have, because of advances in brain science and advances in the science more generally, more understanding of you know, our physiology and our psychology. Annalise, I'm also a social worker by training. We've had an explosion in our understanding, a deepening of how we understand how youth grow and develop. Similarly, we've also increased our understanding of the science of learning. So years ago, before, in the days long before the pandemic, so like 2018, 2019, if you can remember it, there was an explosion of research around the science of learning that led all across the country and all across Virginia, this focus on deeper learning. What should school look like? What could the high school experience look like with less of a focus on testing and more of a focus on learning? And at that time, there was the development of something called the profile of a Virginia graduate, and an effort that some of you may have heard of called Virginia is for Learners. So they took this profile, this framework, as an attempt to really update what the high school experience should look like, modernize graduation requirements in an effort to align it more deeply to the science of learning. And so as Nancy and the team, and I was really fortunate to be a part of the group that was developing this portrait of a thriving youth, as we started to develop this national picture of what do we actually know about the science of adolescence and youth development, there was this opportunity to actually build into some very powerful existing successful work that has been done in Virginia in the past. So in the past, Virginia took this burgeoning research on the science of learning, developed a framework, the profile of a Virginia graduate, and then in local communities all across the Commonwealth, all 132 school divisions started to create their own customized profiles of a Henrico graduate, a Richmond City graduate, an Arlington graduate, you know, you name it. I mean, but also high school specific, so division and high school specific. But the idea was to get folks to focus more on learning. Similarly, we all collectively in after school programs, I saw folks who are working with young people in the child welfare system. So across health and human services, youth development and education, and families, we know more than ever before on the science of thriving and development. And so we have this national picture, what Nancy just gave us a master class in, that we can drill down and create a Commonwealth picture, like the profile of a Virginia graduate, instead a portrait of a thriving youth, to try to get us to act on what we know young people need to be healthy and well. And then to think about what that can look like in all of the spaces and places where they spend time. So in the days after the pandemic, there was a table that was started to bring together leaders across Virginia from education, health and human services, and youth development. And when I talk about youth development, I'm thinking about our after school and summer programs, our before school programs, and then, mentoring and tutoring programs that might happen during the school day in partnership with schools. So this group of about 20 different organizations, including University of Virginia, came together and looked at this big body of research and this incredible national portrait of a thriving youth and said, how do we Virginiafy this? How do we actually make this accessible and actionable to all of the adults and all of the programs and all of the providers across the state who are in charge of caring and preparing for young people? And as Annalise said, we knew that young people and their families were saying the kids are not okay. Like they're overwhelmed, they're overloaded, they're stretched to the max. And so there was this opportunity to get really clear and accessible about what thriving and well-being really look like and require. So what you have available to you, and there's going to be a QR code here at the end of the slide deck where you can download the whole thing and you can use it and be in conversation with me and Nancy to actually put this in play, is an accessible, actionable version of the national portrait that you can be using with your families when you're thinking about kinship care for the person who's on thinking about this, with the mental health core to train them on the science of thriving and youth development, on health and well-being in your after school program, in your college prep program. Importantly, we know that when young people are growing up, the grown-ups really matter. And so your Virginia colleagues decided to not only have a portrait of a thriving youth, but to also develop a companion portrait for thriving adults. Because we know so often that the social workers and the counselors and the youth workers and the teachers and the caseworkers are also really having a hard time. And so we wanted to have this picture that understood that there is a deep interdependence between how the kids are and how the grown-ups are. So Annalise, if you go to the next slide, we'll be able to see that kind of picture of what that looks like. So the first slide here is going to give you an overview of what the Commonwealth portrait of a thriving youth includes. The next one is going to show you what the thriving adult looks like. And as I mentioned, at the end of this, there will be a QR code. There's a much kind of longer PowerPoint deck that's accessible, that's free and available for anybody to use. So we pulled together this alliance, the Commonwealth Alliance for Thriving Youth, as a representative group, a vanguard across the state of people who are really in charge of preparing and caring for young people, and who represent different parts of that puzzle. So we had at the time and continue to have people who are doing practice, working directly with young people, people who are in administrative and leadership roles, in policy roles, folks from school districts, and from these community providers, all at the table. And we basically took the national portrait, what Nancy just described to us, everything we know about the science of positive youth development, adolescence, and thriving. And then we took all of the different aspects that these various programs and settings require. What do schools say young people should experience in middle and high school? What do our health standards say? What do our social skills lists and different after-school programs highlight as important? And we began to drill that down. So what you'll see here, if you can, if you're able to access the visual, is a wheel where at the center is thriving young people with identical domains, sometimes differently named, just to be a little less researchy and a little more available to the front lines, and that anybody, any adult, any young person can quickly understand what you're talking about. So when we think about purpose, for example, we know that that comes with joy. When we think about identity development, that's developing a sense of self. Who am I? Where do I belong? Who are my people? So the core components here are very similar to what Nancy has been talking about. It really is about what young people need and deserve, and that we should expect they can experience in any environment that they're in. And so it's shared accountability for us as people who are supporting young people, but it's also an opportunity to actually have a common framework, common language of what are we agreeing to when we all share the same young people. But you know, their lives, they're not cogs living in a single system like a school. They're living in families and communities, and they're accessing multiple places and all kinds of people. What you should know is behind this first piece, this portrait that describes things like if young people need and deserve resources that help them prioritize their physical health, what should that include? That should include access to good hygiene practices and hygiene supports, like getting your toothbrush and your toothpaste and your soap. It should also include getting enough sleep. What are sort of these principles? We've developed aspects of this framework behind it that then says, how do you actualize that? How do you put it into action? So if young people need to get enough sleep and rest, what does that mean for when sports schedules and games should happen in a community? What does that mean for when school should start in a community? What does that mean for teachers talking at parent-teacher conferences with parents about how much sleep a 10-year-old should get, and being in line with what the pediatricians in that community will say? So each of these pieces moves from the research, which Nancy was talking about, to the sort of principles and actionable ideas, and then into how do we make sure that the grown-ups who are working with these young people growing up know what to say, know what to promote, and know what to push for, especially if they're operating in places where it's not happening. You know, when do you advocate? And when do you continue to do things that you look at and you're like, oh, that really does matter. So if you go to the next slide, Annalise, again, for like time's sake, I'm just orienting you to this framework and letting you know that it's here, giving you the intel that it's in deep alignment to the research in the national portrait, and then inviting you to use it. And then we'll be working with Annalise to think about how we train the youth mental health corps members on the science of thriving, the science of adolescence, and being able to operationalize these frameworks. So as the mom of middle schoolers, I know that my emotional being and my quality of life is deeply impacting my kids, as are their teachers' relationships and all the other adults they're interfacing with. I will let you all know that I've been live polling. I travel all across the country, and have been live polling for the last 5 years, every single group of educators, youth workers, and parents that I talk to, and asking, how are your kids? How are their families? And how are you? And every single time what I hear is overwhelmed, overloaded, stressed, and exhausted. And so collective care is a key piece of this work, for any of the adults who are touching these young people's lives. So the domains are the same. What you need to thrive is the same at every age and stage of life. And so we can think about what this means in our own lives and then how we're pushing this forward and how we care for teams, staff, and what we sort of expect from the professionals who are working with young people. And again, at management or administrative roles, what we might be pushing for increased funding or increased supports for people who are working with young people. So in case you can't see the visual, a couple of those pieces of what we think are really key for thriving adults, that adults need to be in work settings where they're able to have healthy habits, and prioritize and invest in those, and that they're healthy and wholesome environments. So if you are a school teacher and you can't pee because you're so busy all day, and you get to the end of every day and you haven't been able to drink water and you haven't been able to eat your lunch, that's an issue. That's not going to promote your thriving, and it's going to negatively impact the thriving of young people. So we want to flip that and think about how then are after school programs and school settings supporting their staff to meet their own human needs. Similarly, being able to get good emotional care. We know that when we work with young people, really hard things happen. Seeing the communities that you're in, thinking about families in Arlington and how many parents are suddenly out of work or not knowing if they will be out of work, that their kids are coming to your programs with deep uncertainty. And the families need emotional care, and you're absorbing that too. You need emotional care. And so I would just flag that there is an aspect to operationalizing a prioritization on youth mental health and youth thriving by actually putting in these adult practices and these adult supports as well. So Annalise, if you go to the next slide, behind these this sort of focus on thriving are some guiding principles and values that anchor the Commonwealth Alliance, and that we would hope would anchor any organization or individual who is carrying that out, making sure that we are prioritizing individuals above institutions, and that the institutions are prioritizing individuals, that we are prioritizing people above policies, and that those policies are centering and prioritizing the people, and that we're being really holistic and humane, that based on the best information we can get, which is now more information than we've ever had before, on what young people and their grown-ups need to be healthy and well, that we have a moral and ethical obligation to act on that. And we have a personal imperative to try and operationalize that in our own lives with the kids who the young people we are preparing and caring for. So if you were to use this portrait, I would encourage you to use these principles as a starting place and then to customize them based on who you are and how you're using them. These are the principles that the Alliance used in sync with the national work to create what you'll be able to see. But any of this should be customized for your community and for what you're thinking about. So Annalise, if you go to the last slide, actually, we'll just jump straight to the QR code. So if you do have access to the visual presentation right now, there's a QR code that's up on the screen, and you can just take a picture of that. And what I'll do is pass it over to Annalise here in a second, and I'll also drop a link to that document, as well as my email address, using the national portrait to educate folks on the new and evolving science of adolescence and thriving, I think is really critical. Having someone like Nancy do a masterclass for your people would be amazing. And then take this framework and put it into action, and like the profiles of a graduate, use it as an opportunity to cut through the noise and say, at the end of the day, I think we all can agree we want kids to be healthy, happy, and well. And how do we get there? And what might we be prioritizing? And myself, Nancy, and the Alliance, we would love to include you to support you in that work. So Annalise, I'm going to pass back to you, and Amy and others. The link is going to go into the chat here in just a second.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. A huge thank you to Stephanie and Nancy for joining us today. This is an amazing tool and resource, and just so glad that we were able to come together today. And if you're watching the recording, come together in the future to really think about this and how we show up for youth. Wow, so many things going on in my brain and so many rabbit trails that I want to take off on, but we'll stay focused. I will say that this is something that we're really starting to think about both for AmeriCorps, Youth Mental Health Corps specifically, but then also just across the service and volunteerism ecosystem. So we know how many volunteers show up for young people as mentors, as tutors, just a wide variety of volunteer capacities. And so thinking about this for your program is really interesting, right? To think about how you can implement those principles, how you can start thinking about these domains as you're developing, different programs or opportunities for youth to engage. And so just really excited to be able to share this with all of you to think about how this might intersect or impact the way that you do your work. And so kind of just wanted to use that as a transition to talk about next steps. I will send out this recording so you can catch anything that you might have missed. I'll also send out the slide deck so you can kind of take your time through the slides if you'd like. I'll also send out some links. So we'll link to Youth-Nex. We'll send out the link that Stephanie put in the chat to the Commonwealth Alliance for Thriving Youth's work. There's lots of resources on those two websites, self-assessments and kind of specific audiences, portraits, things like that. And so really would encourage you when that email comes out to take a look at the different resources that are available. If you have questions, Stephanie and Nancy's contact information will be in that email as well, but you're also welcome to reach out to Serve Virginia, and we're happy to chat with you about kind of what this can look like in your community. I'll also make two quick plugs. So I mentioned earlier about how we know that youth care about mental health as an issue, and that data came from the Virginia Community Engagement Index, which, if you're not familiar, is a tool that we put out every 2 years to really get a pulse of civic engagement or community engagement across the Commonwealth. We want to know what Virginians care about, how they show up in communities, and how to get more Virginians involved, right? We know that everyone's better when we're all engaged. And so the Virginia Community Engagement Index is really the key way that we can, as a state, better understand what this all looks like. And so I will also put that in the follow-up email as well. Please make sure to take the future Virginia Community Engagement Index by March 4th. It's a 10 to 15-minute survey. We'd love to hear your feedback, and please make sure to share it with everybody you know. It's 18 and up, so unfortunately it's not to capture the voice of young people, but we'd love to capture as many voices of folks that work with young people as possible. And then also just wanted to kind of flag for folks that the Youth Mental Health Corps is coming soon, right? And so please stay tuned to Serve Virginia Communications. You'll see it on all of our social media, different things like that, on different ways that you can serve in the Youth Mental Health Corps or bring the Youth Mental Health Corps to your community. And then finally, if you're interested in training and professional development, if you're here because you're interested in learning more about the different, techniques or best practices that we can use in our work, I just wanted to also plug that the Virginia Volunteerism Summit is May 14th and 15th. It's virtual. It's 2 days packed with amazing information like this, right? We have leaders and experts coming from across the country to really share best practices about everything from volunteer management 101 to how do we work with youth and families to how do we strengthen communities and think about civic capacity. And so anything that you're interested in, I promise we have a summit session for you. If you have questions about accessing the summit or questions about the registration, let me know, and there will be more details in the follow-up email as well. So huge thank you for everybody. Thank you to everybody for being here today. Huge thank you to Nancy and Stephanie as well for sharing all of your wisdom and expertise. And I just, wanted to wish everybody the best Thursday that you can have. It's sunny here in Hanover, Virginia, and so I hope it's sunny where you are as well. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and look forward to chatting soon at another call or in the follow-up email. Thanks, everyone.